Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of RPG Radio. My name is Winback, and on today's episode we're doing something a little bit different. This is part one of two videos that will be focused on going into the endgame of Grim Dawn with a completed level 100 build, looking for the best gear possible. The best way to do that is to farm some of the game's endgame systems, and one of the best ones by far, in my opinion, is the Nemesis system. Nemesis bosses are incredibly big, angry endgame bosses that take a little bit more effort than your normal stock and fare, so I want to go through each and every one of them, figure out how difficult they are for each of the builds that I have a lot of confidence in, and just see how far we can push these builds. Just as a reminder though, this is only going to be focused on Nemesis farming and occasionally key dungeons, because if we get trapped in a key dungeon looking for a Nemesis boss, you better believe we're going to complete the whole thing. Celestial bosses are very big bosses in Grim Dawn, and they are ultimately for the builds built specifically to tackle them. As it is right now, all of the builds on this channel have their own uses, but pinnacle bosses don't really fit the bill for everything that we do. So when it comes to videos about celestial bosses specifically, you'll see very specific builds going into those to counter what those bosses are going to do. That being said, this is all about farming. This is all about feeling out what it is to be an ultimate build, and that should be everything that you need to know about any of these level 100 builds that we have on the channel to know if you want to play them as long as you can. So the first boss on our list is the Nemesis boss for the Ethereal Vanguard faction. His name is Archmage Alexander, and he can be found in most of the places in Act 5, specifically in Malmouth proper with the cities, the slums, all of that different stuff. He is more likely to show up in those zones, and as it is, he is a very Aether-heavy, very caster-heavy, very squishy Nemesis boss. So, if you're looking for a good boss to start out on, to start farming infamy for a Reaper specifically, Archmage Alexander is quite good to get your Nemesis journey started. Now, when I say that Alexander is a squishy Nemesis boss, remember that almost all of the Nemesis bosses have the same amount of health. The reason that he's particularly squishy for this Reaper build is because he has some very bad resistances to the types of damage that we deal. Namely, Alexander has only a 12% resistance to vitality damage, and that is a huge amount of damage that we do in this build. We're also doing cold damage, which he only has 25% resistance to. Really, as long as you're not an Aether-focused or Poison-focused build, Alexander will have a very easy time dying if you can clear out all the mobs around him to avoid getting stuck in the trash, and can just focus him down mano a mano. The best part about the Reaper build is that it is very lifesteal focused, so any damage that he ultimately puts down on you, you can heal right back up by standing still and punching him in the face. Dodging all of the sunders is very important as well. You don't want to give a boss, especially a Nemesis boss, any free extra damage or extra utility on your character, so the reason he died quick was because we were light on our feet and very resistant to what he can put out. This boss gets a trivial in the difficulty department. There were absolutely 0 deaths when it comes to farming him up, and it should be quite the same for anybody who has a similar build to this one. Lifesteal Reaper is going to be a Necromancer coupled with the Nightblade. So we have a pretty decent chunk of mobility, we do a lot of cold damage, and we are built to do nuclear amounts of vitality damage. All of that is mostly going to come with some vampiric attack too, so this build is very good at life stealing, very good at standing still and two-handing a guy to death, but it does have a very small amount of both defensive and offensive ability, so there are some limits to what we can do. That being said, the next Nemesis boss that we are going to focus on is the Barrowholm Nemesis boss. Now, you will not find this guy if you are friendly with your neighborhood cannibals. So if you do not take them as a friendly faction, you can access the Reaper of the Lost. You'll just have to farm up the Barrowhome faction by killing cannibals all throughout Act 5 in Ogdenbog and Gloomwald. Then you can summon the Reaper of the Lost, the big yellow Wendigo character coming directly at us. Super cool looking enemy, but much like Archmage Alexander, this Nemesis boss is very easy to stand still and tank until the end of time, mano a mano. Just like Alexander, the Reaper of the Lost has only 12% vitality resistance, so all of the damage built into the Reaper build that we've got right now is shredding through his health bar, all 3.6 million of it. It is crazy just how fast this one melted. I'd say even faster than Alexander. Similar to Alexander, he does have a huge amount of Aether resistance, so if your build is focused on Aether or Chaos, the Reaper of the Lost is going to be a little bit of a pain, and you will have to do a lot more dip diving and ducking unless you specifically built a tanky class around those damage types that can just stand in the types of damage that he does. Mostly he's doing a vitality damage, physical damage, and piercing damage, but at the end of all things, if you've got enough armor and you've got enough defensive ability, you can stand in the middle of stuff forever. That being said, the Reaper is incredibly easy. The only thing that's different about him from Archmage Alexander is that he does summon quite a few more minions, but they're kind of incidental because of the amount of AoE damage that this build does. You really don't have to worry about clearing out the trash as hard as other bosses. The third Nemesis boss on our list is a little bit more challenging than the previous two. Benjar the Colossal is a Chaos Nemesis boss, and you will get this Nemesis boss completed mostly just by finishing the game all the way through Ultimate. Because he is the Chaos Nemesis boss, it is incredibly easy to farm up the right amount of infamy to get this guy to appear in all the places that you need him. Specifically near the Tomb of the Watchers, the Necropolis, he has a very good chance to show up. You can go down into the dungeon right before the Loghorian, which is the Tomb of the Watchers, to find him there as well. He will show up in the Bastion of Chaos, and you'll want to be very careful when you find him inside a key dungeon, because this is the first boss for at least this build that has the very real opportunity to one-shot you. Now, Benjar is ultimately still at that 3.6 million health number, and his resistances are much the same as the last two that we've been up against, but he does have big resistances to both poison and chaos damage, so if your build is focused on either of these two things, this Nemesis boss will be even more difficult than I am about to explain. The most problematic part about this boss for this build is his ability to completely one-shot you while you are 100% rooted to the ground, while he pulls out his Sunder attack and has you covered in an area of mines. The whole reason that we died just there, the reason that we couldn't move or even dodge, is because he rooted us, walked directly up with his minefield at his back, and got a full Sunder punch on top of that. So that came out to about 15,000 damage worth of my health, which is enough to one-shot me. Any number of Nemesis bosses will be able to do this to you unless you are spec'd very defensively, but the way that the Reaper build works, the way that the lifesteal works with this build, it's not really focused on blocking big hits, it's focused on taking those big hits and healing them right back. Which is part of the reason that Benjar is very difficult. Dodging all of his minefields, his chaos clusters, while simultaneously dodging his Sunder punches, while simultaneously, again, staying out of reach of his entrapment, his root, it's a lot more to take in than the last couple bosses that we've been dealing with. Luckily, still very easy to inevitably kill because he is pretty slow. He doesn't have a way to teleport to you and delete your health bar like some other bosses, but he does require a little bit more brain power, and you can't just stand there and face tank him with this build. So for that reason, he's simple. He does take a little bit more effort, but ultimately still very easy to kill if you are paying attention to what's going on. Nemesis boss number 4 is one that a lot of people may not even have the patience to farm up, and I can respect that. Fabius, the Unseen Ganzar, is the Nemesis boss for Cronley's gang, and really the way that you unlock him is by farming bandits over and over and over again, which are mostly in Act 2, and you can find them between Four Hills as well as the lower end of the Pine Barren. So if you go to Twin Falls from the Pine Barrens, you can repair the bridge, and you can just teleport right over to one of his locations through the Twin Falls Rift Gate. If you've got the patience to farm up this boss, though, the Nemesis factor on him is relatively low. At least for the Reaper build, it is very possible to stand there and face tank his damage for a decent amount of time and lifesteal back off of him. Now, he can do a good chunk of damage to you, and he does go invisible, making it impossible to auto-attack him while he is disappeared, but as long as you are removing the other bandits from the picture, that can further reduce your resistances, and get him one-on-one in whatever location he's at, you can deal with him relatively easily with some fancy footwork and some cooldown management. Fabius is really the first of the Nemesis bosses on this list with some decent resistances to our damage. He has incredibly good resistance against cold at 81%, so a lot of our cold-focused abilities are going to fall on deaf ears. He also has a huge resistance to pierce. While it's not maxed out, it's still big, and his vitality resistance is 32% compared to everybody else's 12%. So he is going to be able to take a lot more damage from us than the last three, but he still can't exactly do all the damage that he needs to do to kill us because we're healing through everything that he can pump out. So you can see the blade spirits around him, you can see him going invisible. He is, I'll say, frustrating to deal with when it's just something that you want to kill and get done, but at the same time, I'm not losing any sleep over the fact that this guy will ever be able to kill me. He's basically an evil Nightblade, so he's doing piercing, bleeding, and physical damage with some cold mixed in there as well, and all of those things that we have maxed out resistance-wise prevent us from dying over and over when we're face tanking him. He is frustrating, but still ultimately simple, as long as you can work in the patience to deal with his invisibility and clear out all of the mobs around him that are inevitably going to make it harder for you to deal damage to him. Now, our fifth boss on the Nemesis run-through here is ultimately the most lethal of the list, especially for this build. This is Gravathul the Void Drinker. This is the second of the Chaos Nemesis bosses, and this man in particular is incredibly annoying to deal with. Gravathul isn't difficult in that his resistances are anything different from the last couple. He does have slightly higher vitality resistance, just like Fabius with 32%, but his cold res is down at 5%, and dealing with that is just too easy because this build has a fairly even split between the vitality and the cold damage that it deals, especially over time and just consistently applying damage to the boss. The real problem comes in with how this boss is very consistently able to one-shot this build. There you have it. It happened for the second time as I am trying to hunt him down and take his cash. Now, the whole reason that he can do that to this character is because he has the ability to nullify all of our auras for 5 seconds and burn 10% of our energy bar out. This ability isn't something that he uses very consistently, but once he starts missing over half of his health bar, you'll definitely see it happen more often. When we are nullified completely, all of our auras and buffs are disabled, meaning that when he wants to punch us, he's going to punch us through the veil of all of reality and directly through the face of our soul. Gravathul is doing physical, fire, and chaos damage, and he is no stranger to very quickly running you down at every opportunity possible. He is quick, he will stay on your tail, and he will make sure that you do not go anywhere. If you didn't notice the little purple 0 above your head, chances are it's probably because he punched you first before you could even realize that you had been nullified. This boss actually does that all in one sweep, and the reason that we died so many times to him before this final triumphant lap is because he is just... it's like a switch flipped. He's like, hey man, sorry, but I'm gonna kill you now. It's also fairly difficult to see coming because it's so fast, so whenever you go up against Gravathul, he doesn't have any CC. Just remember that you can't stand there and face tank him over and over again until he dies. You do have to kite him around, you do have to deal with the way that his kit works while you're dealing damage to him. Specifically for this build for the Reaper, you're going to have to let your Siphon Souls deal a lot of damage to him over time because he's not going to spend a lot of time standing in your whirlpools. Those unfortunately are dealing a lot of our cold damage, and because he has a little bit higher resistance to the vitality damage, he can sit through your Siphon Souls a bit longer than you really want him to. So, while he is chasing you around, while he's turning all of your buffs off, he is incredibly scary, but once he has debuffed you, that is going to go on a pretty decent cooldown. That is a 15-second cooldown. So once he nullifies all of your abilities, he's got 15 seconds until he can do it again, so you can run up to him, unload all of your abilities, stand there and fight him until the very end, or at least until that 15 seconds is up. If you don't manage to kill him in that time period, he can nullify you again and kill you all over again. But if you're managing to dodge that 15-second timer, this boss is still tough, but manageable. We died 3 times trying to farm him up, dealing with his stupid nullification ability, but ultimately, it's not like this boss is going to outlast you with unlimited health or chase you down with a blink that will completely prevent you from attacking them. He is incredibly easy to kill once you are in a rhythm of avoiding his nullification, and really the boss comes down more to the skill that you have with the build rather than a numbers advantage that the boss has over you through resistances or any other number of things. Now, the final boss on this list is going to be the Nemesis of the Beast faction, and that is Chupacabra, the Endless Menace herself, the grandmother of all Yetis, hiding in the forest, making sure that you have a terrible time trying to farm her out. Now, despite being considered one of the most annoying Nemesis bosses in the game, I have a very special place in my heart for Chupacabra because her model looks fantastic, the damage that she does is exactly like my own, and she is a very unique experience when it comes to doing damage or dealing with a Nemesis boss. She is really the first wall that I hit when it came to this build playing the Reaper, so I did have to do a little bit of retooling. I had to rethink the way that I was playing in order to fight her. So, that being said, Kuba has an 88% resistance to vitality damage. She has 81% resistance to cold damage. So she is absolutely armed to the teeth to shake off all of the damage that we can do to her, so we have to stand here and fight for a very long time. I would say, with the benefit of hindsight, you should avoid Chupacabra at all costs when it comes to this build. Even though she and the Reaper of the Lost are very close together, and you could potentially run into both of them very quickly and farm them both quickly-ish, Kuba is going to shake off so much of your damage that she's going to take a lot of time. The other ridiculously difficult part of dealing with her is that all of these blood pools that she is laying down on the ground are dealing damage to you that she is going to heal from. She is a vampiric enemy. Not even the worst part about her, but all of the blood puddles you're seeing on the ground actually overlap with the blood puddles that this build forms. So I don't know if I'm ever standing on my own. I think mine are a little bit smaller than hers. Maybe that's the distinction, but they overlap so often that it's impossible to tell if you're standing on one of your own. blood puddles, or if you're standing on one of hers. After you kill this entire boss's first bar of health, she is going to split into 2 smaller Kubacabras. You may have been thinking that Kuba has the same amount of health as all the other Nemesis bosses by the amount of time that it took us to take out her first form, but she actually only has 1.6 million. Her health bar breaks up again as she breaks down into smaller menaces. So Kubacabra number 2 is Kubacabra the Enduring, and there's 2 of them that you have to kill that are summoning blood puddles on you at all times. They are healing off of the damage that they do to you, and you really do have to focus them one at a time. The damage that you can do to both of them with your AoEs is ultimately incidental, so making sure that you kill one before you kill the other is definitely the easier strategy. Once you kill the Enduring Kubacabra, they are going to break down yet again into 2 more small Kubas that are the Tenacious. So the Tenacious versions are much easier to kill. They still have an incredibly big health bar of 700,000, but they do not have nearly as much difficulty added to them. The health that they're stealing, since that health bar is only 7k instead of 1.6 million, or 700k instead of 1.6 million, they are much easier to just shred through, even though they have very high resistances to the damage that we do. Really, when it comes to dodging Kuba's abilities, you have to make sure that you are not standing on the blood puddles, and you have to make sure that you are dodging her blood breath, her vitality breath. Now, her blood breath does do quite a bit of damage, and it is going to reduce your health by a percentage of anywhere from 18 to 26%. It's also doing bleeding damage, and it's going to slow you on top of that. So, if you manage to get hit by Big Kuba's bleeding breath, you are going to take a lot of damage. And if you are standing in her blood puddles while getting hit with that, you're going to give her a massive amount of health back. It is much easier to deal with once you start working on the smaller Kubas, but the biggest Kubacabra, the Endless Menace, can flat out deal 50 to 60% of your health if you let her hit you with her full salvo. She also gains attack speed from attacking you over and over again, but one of the few blessings of her splitting into smaller Yetis is that the Yeti pathing is pretty bad. And it's not only evident in Kuba, but every Yeti that you see, even packs of them over in the Asterkarn part of the map or in Ugdenbog, you'll see them just bunch up and they can't attack you because they can't walk around each other or they can't get around terrain. You can basically kite them all so that they don't hit you consistently, and you can survive the massive amounts of damage that they can do if you are just face tanking them. So keep your feet happy, keep dodging those blood puddles, make sure that Kuba is not getting all of the blood spit on top of you, whether or not she is small or big, and you should be able to deal with her in time. That being said, it's still no walk in the park. You can tell from the video at this point that she is extremely time consuming to kill, and that's part of the reason I think especially with this Vitality and Cold Damage Reaper, there is really no point in fighting her unless you are going for an achievement or you just want to see how the fight goes. Like I said, she's my probably favorite in terms of the way that the Nemesis bosses look and their abilities and the uniqueness of them. But apart from that, the fight is incredibly frustrating, and if you are not dodging on top of your game literally every second of the battle, you are going to be feeding the guys that are trying to kill you the entire time. So for that reason specifically, Kubacabra the Endless Menace is going to be very hard. She's not going to kill you if you're paying attention, but paying attention is also making sure that you have enough brain power early in the morning or late at night to sit there and do this fight, because it can get extremely tedious, and the amount of boredom that tedium can spark in some people can lead to very easy mistakes. When you make those mistakes, you get caught, you get killed, and you have to do the fight all over again. Meanwhile, she got anywhere from 25 to 50% of her health bar back while you were sitting in town screaming about how awful that was. So, like I said before, only pick a fight with her if you absolutely need to, if you want the achievement, if you're looking for the beast warrant, you're gonna have to farm her. I would just maybe find a different build to farm her on, because this Reaper did not have a good time. But all that being said, thanks so much for hanging out. Next week, we will be back with the second set of Nemesis bosses, rating them on a scale from easy to ridiculously hard, and we'll see if any of them can match just how difficult Chupacabra was for the Vitality and Cold Damage Reaper dual-wielding Vitality Wave build. Thanks so much for hanging out, everybody. I will see you all next time.